We're going to have a presentation by Brian Anderson. Brian is a psychiatrist resident at the University of California, San Francisco. He's also part of a team that is designing research with psilocybin for anxiety in HIV members, and maybe another protocol to come. He's also a member of our NAPI group in Brazil, and he has done field work in different parts of the world. And I think he's, one of our most promising young leaderships in this field, and it's my great pleasure to introduce him. Thank you, Brian.
So good morning. My name is Brian Anderson. I'm here representing the BAND lab of UCSF, which is the Bonding and Attunement in Neuropsychiatric Disorders lab. Our lab has mostly worked with oxytocin in the past, looking at human connection, and then we had the chance to start working with psychedelic medicines as well, also really focusing on how they can help people connect and how this might be therapeutic. I just want to recognize our lab, the PIs, Josh Woolley, for this first psilocybin study. I have a couple co-authors, one of co-investigators, one of whom is here, Chris Stouffer. And we have a whole team that's really helped us put this together. Gabby Agan-Liebes, Eve Ekman. We've had a lot of support, intellectual support, and just motivational support from people like Alicia Danforth, other people at UCSF, Rob Daroff, Robert Grant, Jay Savelius, and it's been a real team effort to get this off the ground. Just some disclosures. These are the people and foundations that are supporting our work, who've either contributed financially or just helping us coordinate and start working with psilocybin at UCSF. And I just want to give a little background for this talk. My research background is actually in drug ethnography anthropology, for which I've worked with Bia and other people in this room for a number of years, looking at ayahuasca churches and other entheogen-using communities. Transitioned to working on a clinical trial, but now that UCSF is starting to get involved with psychedelic medicine research, for me it was really important to be able to draw on that work and really look at what is known from communities that have been using entheogens and plant medicines for quite some time. How can we bring this into the research when we know that there's a lot about, in particular, what does it mean for these types of experiences to be had and these types of lives to be lived in a group setting, in the community? And so how could that be then translated into a group therapy trial? So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be kind of coming back to that theme. That's sort of also how I was able to fit this talk into the plant medicine track, even though we're working not with an actual mushroom, we're not doing sort of organic psilocybin, this is synthetic psilocybin. I just want that to be clear. So in this presentation, I'll briefly talk about the history of psychedelic-assisted group therapy, talk about some of the barriers and benefits of actually doing research in groups, which has not been done in the last 20 years that this work has started to pick up again. And then I'll give some of the basics on the trial that we're about to start at UCSF, doing psilocybin-assisted group therapy for long-term AIDS survivors, in particular trying to address existential distress and complicated grief in this population. So looking at the history of psychedelic-assisted group therapy, this is a bottle of Sandow's psilocybin from back in the day. But I also want to just point out that there was, in the history of looking at group therapy, there was an effort to go out to communities that were using these substances in groups and learn from them. This goes back to the very beginning, looking down at group use of mushrooms down in Mexico, and also Native American church peyote ceremonies, and this is something I want to keep alive in the work today. So I'm not going to go through this extensively. If anyone wants to read more about this, I do suggest the book chapter by Torsten Passi in Ralph Metzner's book on psilocybin mushrooms. But there were groups that were done with LSD, but also psilocybin. These were done in countries a number of countries throughout the world. There were different ways of doing this. Sometimes substances were combined, ketamine, LSD, psilocybin, sometimes just one drug, sometimes high doses, sometimes low doses. But there really is a depth of knowledge that's out there, but it's just not, wasn't published and wasn't described in the standards that we would use for therapeutic research today, and a lot of it hasn't been mentioned, but I think people should at least be aware of that. Now, when we look back at what research was done back in the day, this is probably one of the most famous group therapy studies. It wasn't really group therapy in the sense of processing in a group, but it was a group administration in the Good Friday experiment that was sort of the basis of a lot of the work that we're seeing today coming out of Johns Hopkins and looking at mystical type experience. But there was also a study that a lot of people don't talk about done at that same time, and that was the Concord Prison experiment done in Massachusetts by Leary and Metzner and their team, where they took a group therapy approach. I just want to highlight some elements of that. They actually heavily reference this idea of, like Alcoholics Anonymous, you can get people to work together on overcoming behavioral change problems. And they were trying to look at recidivism in prison inmates. They did groups, some larger groups. They ended up mostly using smaller groups is what they found was more beneficial, just 3 subjects at a time. They set it up so that people would have 2 dosing sessions spread some time apart. Their doses were significantly higher than what we're using today. A lot of the studies will talk about sort of 25 milligrams is maybe where we want to go. They started off around 20, and then for the second dosing session, people went up to 40, 50, 60, and I think one person even took 70. They had something that was unique where they had one member of one of the pilot groups who was a prison inmate come back as a peer facilitator for later groups, looking at how you can maybe train people to go through this, and then also work with others to have that sort of peer relationship to establish trust for the next group. They did not have adverse events, and they really actually wanted to do something that didn't pan out for the study. Once people left the prison, they were hoping that they would go live together in like a halfway house setting to be able to continue integration together with other people who had been through this experience. It didn't work out logistically, but this was really something that they were trying to bring into the research. How do we keep people together who'd been through this experience, thinking that this was important for the therapeutic outcome? So if all this work has been done, if this has been piloted, if people were talking about this in the 1960s, how come we're not doing this now? There's a number of reasons why it's hard to do research in groups, especially when you're adding the complications of having psychedelic catalysts in the therapeutic process. One is just recruitment. All of these studies, these clinical trials, have had a really hard time to recruit, find people who meet the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so the idea that you're going to have enough people all at the same time to be in a group together, that's challenging. Getting people to decide on they're going to show up on this day at this time and keep a regular schedule is hard. Something about statistics, if you want to show that these medicines are effective and prove with the general standards of research that this is something that is beneficial to people, you need to show a statistical significance over, let's say, a placebo. And when you do an intervention in a group, you actually reduce what's called your power. So your ability to show a difference is reduced by maybe up to 20% because of the correlation of the clinical outcomes that we often see in group therapy research. So you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot if you're just trying to get a good effect size, potentially. Also, when you have people in a group, how are you supposed to standardize what people's expectations are if they're talking to each other? And this has been a big concern in the psilocybin research because that can have a big effect on the outcome. We all talk about set is really important. When people's sets are meshing with each other in one way in one group and different in another group, you have significant differences in what you're producing. And there's a big question, should we even be doing group research at this time? There's limited resources. A lot of people want to get to an FDA indication. Is this really essential right now? Well, we've pushed forward with the group work because I think there's some ways that we can address this. One thing that we've done to address the issue with recruitment is we've tried to work heavily with partners in the community who work with our population to help us recruit, and they're very excited about trying to get the study going soon. We're working with a population that's very motivated for treatment, so we hope that they will show up on time and participate on a good schedule. Our study is a phase 1 safety and a feasibility study, so we're not actually trying to show efficacy, so we don't have to worry about the power issue for right now. And even though the expectancies will kind of mix and influence one another, it's actually closer to what we're going to see in the real world once people start doing this, and so I'm happy to kind of see what that looks like now. And yes, the resources are limited, but if you can get the group together, you spend less time, it takes less staff to see as many people to do the integration and preparation sessions. And if you can choose the right population, it should work well. So our population, I sort of conceive of having like a really concentrated form of existential distress. You can show a bigger effect in people when there's more of a sort of an issue that you're solving in the first place. And our population, even though it's long-term AIDS survivors, a lot of them do have cancers, and so our particular population can have some data that helps generalize to the cancer safety data as well. So then, why do group therapy research? What are the benefits that we're going to see? We talk about trust, letting go, and be open, TLO, in some of the psilocybin studies. I think it's a lot easier to do that, and we see this when you have peers there, other people who are going through this with you. Hopefully that can make this trust and feeling like you can surrender and go into the experience more when you have people going through it at the same time with you. When you look at the reports of people who have been in these studies, a lot of them are saying that I would like to be in touch with other people who went through that experience. If you were looking at if you were watching the panel from the Madison psilocybin study, they found each other. The participants found each other afterwards, and they were saying they had a lot of emotional support from being able to talk to other people who had these experiences. And it's not just the emotional support, but there's also this sort of cognitive processing of what you went through, establishing a norm. You just experienced something that you can't really talk about openly with people over dinner. Your relatives might not get it. People at work might not understand. But you can go from maybe being disoriented to being sort of reoriented with a group that can say, this is normal, this felt good for me too, and come up with a new standard of what it means to go through a therapeutic experience. With groups, with populations that have a lot of loneliness, isolation, like ours does, just being in a group itself can be rather helpful. And then there's something that I think a lot of people have seen where maybe we have a friend that went to Peru and did an intense ayahuasca retreat or did some sort of entheogenic work over the weekend, and they come back. And now they want to help people too. They have this enthusiasm. They want to bring the work. There's this sort of like evangelization that happens where people take on this role of sort of like the healer that was wounded and is now better but wants to help other people. That energy can hopefully be translated into a really effective therapeutic mechanism for other people if you're doing it in a group, doing it for each other versus trying to go out into the world and tell everyone else about this amazing thing. Maybe we can harness that to be more therapeutic for people in the study. And then one thing I find is really important is that these studies are mostly working with people who don't have a lot of psychedelic experience, right? The patients who are coming, some of them have no psychedelic experience, some haven't had some for quite some time, but there's something to be said about going through like a psilocybin experience when you have had a lot of that. It's different. So what the studies have documented is not the psilocybin experience, but it's people who are more novice. There's something about, if you look at maybe like the ayahuasca churches where they talk about firmeza, about being able to sit up, about being able to attend to what's going on in the ceremony. People can work with the experience differently when they have more experience with the drug. Now, we're not going to give people lots of experiences, but I hope that by being with other people in a group, they can then learn from the experiences of other people and learn how to maybe manage the experience better and change what their experience with the psilocybin is, just by learning from other people what they went through and going more from a novice to an experienced person, sort of secondhand. Now, psilocybin group therapy, how's this going to work, and how can we make this work in palliative care? I want to thank Tony Bossis, who turned me on to this author, Eric Cassell, some time ago, who wrote a series of important papers on suffering and healing and medicine. Dr. Cassell talked about the importance of transcendence as a way of dealing with pain and suffering. But if you actually go back and look at his text, it's not just the person transcending their pain. It's not just the individual having a transcendent, transformative experience. He actually says that when transcendence locates the person in a far larger landscape, the sufferer is not isolated by pain, but is brought closer to a transpersonal source of meaning and to the human community that shares those meanings. I think this is important because meaning is created in groups, and if we can give people a group within which they can have this transcendent experience and then share that meaning, I feel like this might be even more effective for these meaning-making medicines to be translated into something that we can use in healthcare today. Just briefly, I'm sure a number of you are familiar with the work that's been done with psilocybin and cancer patients. This is a quick highlight. A lot of people saw the release that came out at the end of last year where this was published. This was in a lot of newspapers. And basically what they showed is that just with one dose, moderate to high amount of psilocybin with psychological support and therapy, patients who have cancer or who had cancer and who had the depression and anxiety related to this were able to have significant improvements in depression and anxiety, both in remission and response. This is just the data from the Johns Hopkins team and very similar results from the NYU team. This is one of their subjects. It's not just about the graphs, it's about what people go through, it's about what people experience. Something that this gentleman, Richard, said, and you can watch his video on the Hefter website, was that he went into this psilocybin experience, he had cancer, and all of a sudden he was going back into this experience of when he was younger and his young daughter was dying of cancer. He said, "The feelings just came flooding up. I was completely in the sense of despair and loss that I had when she died later. And that was almost 30 years of not denial, but putting it down, suppressing of what that felt like. And that was very liberating to go through that." He had this experience of spontaneously processing this very prolonged, complicated grief. This was actually came up with a number of the cancer patients, even if this wasn't their intention to go into this and process this in their own experience. And this quote has really made me think that this therapy might be good for another population that we have here in San Francisco. So thinking about who beyond patients with cancer might benefit from this. Long-term AIDS survivors. So this took us, talking to people in the community, thinking about, what in San Francisco we could contribute to the field. And we thought about these people who went through tragic loss, who lost friends, family members, who were themselves caretakers for people who died. Whole sort of social networks sort of disintegrated in the 80s and 90s before we had effective treatments to help people live longer with HIV. These are photos from ACT UP, from the protesters who demanded treatment when it wasn't there for them. And now that people have antiretrovirals, many of them are living to have more of a full lifespan, but there's still suffering, there's still trauma that people carry with them, there's still depression, isolation, and the community has started to come together and self-identify as AIDS survivors. This is a clip from a documentary that I highly recommend from the San Francisco Chronicle called Last Man Standing. It talks about these AIDS survivors in San Francisco. And don't look at the small numbers, but basically the idea is that the red is AIDS deaths. One person stands for 100 people per year in San Francisco. This is from the San Francisco Department of Public Health. The black below that, AIDS diagnoses per year. And then the bar below that is people living with HIV in San Francisco. So we have a lot of people here, but who went through a lot of death and loss earlier. As of 2012, over half the people with HIV in San Francisco were considered older, meaning over than 50 years old. And a lot of them went from being terminally ill at one point to now having a lot of medical comorbidities that go with that. HIV-associated non-AIDS conditions diabetes, certain cancers, and what seems like sort of accelerated form of aging. There's a lot of mental health problems that they suffer, and because I'm short on time, basically I'll summarize and say this population that needs a lot of treatment and a lot of work to address their depression and isolation and trauma, who are reaching out with these organizations that we've partnered with. We're going to do a study with them. We're going to start pretty soon. We're just doing a pilot study, but we're going to give moderate to high dose psilocybin with group therapy before and after. How long before? 4 weeks before, 4 weeks after, and then individual drug dosing. And we hope to start recruiting actually in the next couple months. Because I need to stop, if you can find this on clinicaltrials.gov, you can search UCSF clinical trial psilocybin, and that will be, that'll take you to our site at UCSF, where you can indicate interest in the study, or people can just email me, and I'm happy to talk more about the study and see if we can get people access to this experimental care soon.
Questions? 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 Here. Yeah, you can come here. One question. To give more time to others.
How about half a question? Oh, thank you. Hi there. I'm a psychiatrist. I work on this side of the bay, and I've worked with cancer patients for many years, led support groups and supervised support groups, and I think that the implications of group settings for many, I don't like saying patient populations, but people populations is incredible, and because I think a lot of what we've been hearing about in the last few days is really individual work. And I guess one question that just strikes me right now is, ayahuasca and Native American ceremonies are done with people together. What do you think about the ideas of not only processing beforehand and afterwards in a group, but when might the medication usage itself in a group setting be useful?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We initially wanted to do that, and we just basically, it's hard enough to get one of these studies going. It's hard enough with the logistics to make this happen, do this safely. So we're going to do this individual dosing, but if someone else wants to do a group dosing study, I highly encourage you to try, and maybe some day we'll get to do that too. Thanks.
Can you come, please? We are recording because it's all going online afterwards, so it's important to speak on the mic.
Just a quick question about dosing. You said you're doing 2 different doses, is that right? Or a high dose? I was wondering why not go with like 25 milligrams?
We're shooting for that. We're going to do the same dose that they did in the cancer study for the first group, and then if that goes well, we're going to try to move up to a slightly higher dose. Yeah.
Sorry, and then why wouldn't you're only having 2 group therapy sessions, one before and one after, separated by 4 weeks?
Weekly group therapy.
Weekly group therapy.
For 4 weeks before, 4 weeks after. Yeah.
I have a question, Brian. You talked, the title of the talk was like how your empirical research doing ethnography with different groups has influenced the design protocol. Can you make a summary on the main argument on this point? Why do you think the fact that you went many times to rituals in different churches and drank ayahuasca there, and how did that inspire this protocol?
It inspired a lot of ideas for the protocol, and then there were a lot of things we just could not fit in. So like I was talking about, I think it's important for people to be able to learn from their experiences, talk to other people, go back and then try the experience again and see where that goes. We had 2 dosing sessions. We had to cut it down for just issues of timing and funding. We couldn't include that. But the insistence of having this as a group study comes from that. A lot of people said this is too complicated, just wait and do it later. But this really, for me, this was the point, is we need people to be able to get together in a structured way after they've been through such a different experience to help them support each other. And that's the main thing that has come through. Yeah.
And could you perhaps share with the public your master's that you did in London, that you addressed a similar topic about interviewing psychiatrists and their experience and how their experiences influence research protocols they were doing?
Yeah, just very, very briefly, Bia knows this work well, but I did work interviewing psychiatrists and scientists in Brazil who had a lot of experience drinking ayahuasca and then studying ayahuasca, and just looked at interviews and how their work was shaped. And it seemed it was very important to acknowledge that having experience with these substances made the work probably better, the research better and more informed, and probably safer for the participants. So that was just something that we did and documented a few years ago. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay.